Thanks for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to be talking about one of my favourite board games, Spirit Island. If you aren't familiar, Spirit Island is a game about defending an island from invading colonisers. The players play as nature spirits who work with the native islanders, or Dahan, to repulse the invaders. It's designed by Eric Royce and is widely regarded to be one of the best cooperative games ever made. Spirit Island has a similar feel to other cooperative games like Pandemic, but it is a bit of a step up in terms of complexity. I really love the theme of this game, the unique playstyle of each spirit, and the puzzles that the players have to solve each turn. The focus of my video today is on the spirits themselves. I'm going to be ranking the 12 spirits from the base game and expansion, starting with my least favourite and working up to my favourite. For each spirit, I'll explain a little bit about why I like them or don't like them, review their starting powers, their innate powers, and their special abilities. I'll also talk about the weaknesses they have and how they synergize with the other spirits. Most of what I say will assume some level of familiarity with the game, so if you haven't played this game before, please do watch a how to play video first, and then pop back. So, starting with number 12, we have Shadows Flicker Like Flame. While I quite like the theme of this spirit, I have to put it at the bottom. My problem with Shadows is more of a general issue I have with how the fear mechanic works in the game. It's an extremely simplistic and linear process. You generate fear, it ticks up the track, and that's about it. While fear is how you win the game, you don't actually feel like you're affecting the board in any meaningful way. All you're doing is generating fear, and that doesn't make for a very fun play experience. I have taught Spirit Island to a number of new players, and there are at least 2 people who, when they picked this spirit, decided that they wanted to abandon the game partway through because they weren't enjoying playing as shadows, and I think that's a real shame, and I think it speaks to the lack of interesting decisions that this spirit offers. Their starting powers are a big part of my problem with Shadows. Concealing Shadows is a bad defense card, since the invaders can still place Blight. Crops Wither and Fade rarely helps prevent a Blight because it just downgrades the incoming damage by 1. Most problem lands in Spirit Island tend to have 3 incoming damage or more. Favours Called Dew and Mantle of Dread, these two are a little better. Pushing invaders and moving Dahan around, those are always useful tools to have, but then other spirits do this better anyway. In terms of tracks, it's pretty standard for Shadows, but they do have an interesting energy jump from 1 to 3. That can allow them to take major powers early, and I will aim to do this if I want to have any fun playing as Shadows. One good major to pick up is Grant Hatred a Ravenous Form. Since you aren't that great at stopping Blight, it is quite nice to have a card that allows you to retaliate. Their innate power starts weak and gets a little stronger. Having the option to take out a city at the maximum rank is always a nice goal to shoot for. I generally find the Shadows of the Dahan special ability to be quite variable in terms of its strength. It can set you up for some nice defend and Dahan retaliation if you draw the right minor powers, but then the energy drain can keep you from accelerating to majors, which you really need to be doing. If we think about how Shadow synergizes with other spirits, then anyone who can provide defense and can deal with the established invader lands, like Vital Strength of the Earth or Spread of Rampant Green, these are pretty solid choices to go along with Shadows. There's quite a big jump between Shadows and my number 11, which is Keeper of the Forbidden Wilds. Unlike Shadows, I feel like Keeper always has some interesting decisions to make, but their presence placement is such a complex puzzle, and I personally don't enjoy it. You really don't like Blight, you do like Wilds, but getting Wilds down and getting Blight off the board requires a fair bit of effort on your part. Without a lot of Wilds in your vicinity, you will be taking this last growth option quite a lot, which is extremely costly. Also, unless you place Wilds in the slow phase, you could end up losing the token to the invader's exploration, and that can ruin your plan for next turn. One thing I really like about Keeper is their energy track. It ramps up extremely quickly, which allows you to go straight in for mages and do some real damage. Their card plays track is also pretty solid. It quickly gets up to 2 and 3 card plays. In my experience, this isn't enough to counteract their awkward growth choices, but it is nice to have. The other thing I really like about Keeper is one of their starting cards, Towering Wrath. I love cards that have multiplying damage, and if you can solve the presence placement puzzle, this card pays serious dividends. 2 of their other powers are fine. They've got some utility with Boon of Growing Power, and some blight removal with Regrow from Roots. I'm really not a huge fan of Sacrosanct Wilderness for a few reasons. Firstly, big damage is useful against areas that have lots of invaders, but then lands with lots of invaders probably have blight, and this card doesn't work against blighted lands. It's also difficult to place enough wilds to ramp up the damage unless you get lucky with your minor draws. So you're often spending 2 energy to kill a town or just to place 1 wilds. That's not a great return for 2 energy. Their innate powers are solid, and I feel they're quite thematic with how the spirit plays overall. It's the theme of protecting my lands from the trespassers. So on the left you've got killing the invaders with ramping damage, and on the right you've got a way to clear out explorers and place wilds. Their special rule often feels like a negative because you're pushing the Dahan from your lands and you generally want Dahan around to kill invaders. But Keeper does a pretty good job of that anyway, so the Dahan are more useful elsewhere with more defensive spirits. Keeper synergizes well with spirits that can make use of the displaced Dahan, such as Thunderspeaker. There's also a great thematic and mechanical link between Keeper and Spread of Rampant Green, in that they're both plant or tree spirits, and Spread can help Keeper to solve the presence placement problem with their Gift of Proliferation card. Keeper does have a strong anti-synergy with Heart of the Wildfire. All the blight that Wildfire places makes your presence problem even more pronounced. And neither of you care that much about the Dahan, which often means that you are underutilizing an important resource. For major powers, you love to draw Strangling Firevine to give you even more mileage out of your Wilds tokens. Also, Unrelenting Growth gives you immediate access to both Sacred Sites and Wilds. I have a feeling that my next pick will be the most controversial, given how low down it is. My number 10 is Bringer of Dreams and Nightmares. Some people love this spirit, and I can see why. But similarly to Shadows Flicker Like Flame, Bringer is so focused on the fear aspect of the game that you have less impact on the board itself. What's worse, Bringer's special ability means that your ability to affect the board is even further reduced. You can't damage or destroy anything. The extra fear and push is nice, but then push only takes you so far once the invaders start to gain a foothold. The reason I like them quite a bit more than Shadows, though, is that knowing what fear cards are coming up is a great innate power. It allows you to maximise each fear card's effectiveness, which is like having access to a whole other set of powers. Night Terrors is a pretty boring innate power as it just gains fear, but at least it synergizes quite nicely with one of their starting cards, Dread Apparitions, and this is a card that I really like. You do have to have presence in the land to make these two work together, but then Bringer has an excellent growth option of place a presence at 4 distance and gain 2 energy, which means playing this card is always an option. Their other starting powers are fine. You've got Dahan mobility on 2 of them, and then you have a really interesting Gain a Major Power card, which is best used on a land with a big Dahan stack, say 4 or more Dahan, which maximises the energy gain that you get from this card. Bringer also has pretty decent presence tracks. You do need to place 3 presence, however, to get to 3 card plays, and that probably means you're going to be stuck at 2 for a while. This does mean you're going to rely on your strong energy gain and major powers to be strong. For synergies, you want to pair with anyone who can clear multiple invaders quickly, such as Lightning Swift Strike. Or Heart of the Wildfire. There's even more synergy with Ocean, as Bringer can use the push from their special ability to push the invaders towards the coastal lands where Ocean is waiting to drown them. For major powers, you obviously enjoy seeing Terrifying Nightmares, which along with Dread Apparitions can defend even the most problematic of lands. Twisted Flower Murmur Ultimatums is also a great pickup, and that's because it removes invaders rather than destroying them, so it gets around your special ability. At number 9 we have Spread of Rampant Green. I quite like Spread. I think they are the most balanced spirit in the game in that they can do pretty much everything quite well, with the exception of fear generation and killing explorers. So the reason they are quite low down on my list is they have quite linear gameplay. Your presence builds up extremely quickly, you make sacred sites and problem spots, and then you try to combo your damage dealing powers to clear out invaders. None of this is bad, but each game of Spread blurs into one, and there are no big moments where you really feel like you've hit a power spike. I'll happily play Spread if we need a defense and utility based spirit, but then I will spend a lot of the time wondering maybe I should have picked a spirit that is higher up on my list. Spread starting powers show off their balanced approach quite nicely. You have a control card here that pushes invaders. You have a utility card for presence placement, and an offensive card with high damage potential. Overgrown in Night either allows you to place your own presence or generate fear. It is nice to have the choice, but you'll almost always be using it for the presence placement. Looking at their board, it is more of the same. Your growth choices are all about maximising the presence placement. Your first turn will almost always be the middle choice, so that you can get 2 presence down, 2 card plays, and some energy income. The 3 energy choice is good for picking up mages, but their energy track is fairly weak, so you're unlikely to sustain repeated play of major powers. The most powerful parts of Spread's boards are definitely their innate powers, which at higher levels can kill cities and defend lands quite nicely. Also, Choke the Land with Green, their special ability, can deal with the biggest problems on the board, if you have sacred sites in the right place. Placing Destroyed Presence with steady regeneration is another great ability, but it only tends to be useful in the late game, since you'd rather be clearing out your presence tracks. Of all the spirits, I'd say finding a weakness for Spread is pretty tough. They just do everything pretty well, aside from moving and killing explorers. But then there are plenty of minor powers that do that. Sometimes getting the most use out of Creeper's Tear into Mortar is a challenge due to the range 0, but I'm really reaching for a weakness here. The most obvious synergistic spirit with Spread of Rampant Green is Serpent. Serpent is so reliant on getting their presence down as fast as possible, and Spread can help them with that using Gift of Proliferation. Spread also places presence so reliably that Serpent always has a good choice for absorbing essence. These two are such a powerful combo, but in my experience, the Serpent player is probably having a lot more fun than the Spread player. Spread also likes to work with any spirit that has issues getting presence down, like Keeper of the Forbidden Wilds, or who benefits strongly from placing additional presence, such as Heart of the Wildfire. Honestly, you can probably find a good synergy with all other spirits. That's just how versatile Spread is. For mages, I really like to find Smothering Infestation. It targets the opposite lands to stem the flow of fresh water, and so it gives Spread full coverage, and is also cheap enough for Spread to play regularly. Number 8 and number 9 are so close that they could be in either order, and they are both quite similar in being extremely versatile spirits that like to build sacred sites and place presence constantly. Number 8 is Vital Strength of the Earth. Now, the reason I put Vital Strength above Spread is that Spread is steady and consistent, but it lacks big moments. Vital Strength is similarly steady and consistent, but is also occasionally the star of the show. and that's mostly due to this card, Rituals of Destruction. It is costly, but when you pull it off, it can clear out built-up lands. Also, Strength's energy generation is really solid, and that does mean that you can pick up a couple of major powers quite handily and really do some damage. Just be aware that because they have a number of starting cards that cost 3, they shouldn't really be taking mages that cost lots of energy if they want to play them consistently. If we take a look at their other starting cards, you'll see that like Spread, there's a good mix. You've got some control, some defense, and a guaranteed way to solve problem spots for one turn. Their innate is another reason that I like to play Vital Strength of the Earth. For my money, this is the most interesting utility power in the game. I can't count the number of times I've asked the table, who would like to repeat a power card this turn, and everyone immediately starts making the case for why I should pick them. It can create some amazingly strong combinations, even at the lowest level, and even with minor powers. Imagine 2 spirits having Defend 2 in every land, thanks to Double Encompassing Ward, or generating a total of 12 elements, thanks to Double Elemental Boon. Their special ability isn't super interesting, but it does create some interesting decisions around your growth choices. Since you always place presence, you want to create sacred sites as much as possible, and where you place your sacred sites can strongly affect the flow of the game. Vital does have 2 main weaknesses. The first is that getting to 2 card plays is locked away behind your second presence placement, and that does make you a slow starter. The second is that this middle growth option is the only way that they can grab new cards, and you have to time it right so that you don't place a pointless third presence in the same land. This makes Vital's reclaim cycle a bit of a puzzle, since you always want to pick this option at least once per reclaim, and you want to use it to create a new sacred site. In terms of synergies, I like to play Vital Strength with anyone who has some control over the Dahan to set up Rituals of Destruction, so Thunderspeaker is a good choice there. Also, anyone who can benefit from starting cards being doubled up is a really strong choice. So a couple of examples are Ocean's Swallow the Land Dwellers and Heart of the Wildfire's Flames Fury. Vital Strength likes to see major cards that are well costed and provide the elements they need to trigger their innate, so I really like to get to the Trees and Stone Speak of War. This is probably the best card that you can pull as Earth because it not only synergizes with your innate, but it also helps to top up your offensive and defensive powers later in the game when the invaders may have built up in a number of lands. Coming in at number 7 is the last of the 3 fear-based spirits and my favourite one to play. Sharp Fangs Behind the Leaves doesn't share the same problems as Shadows and Bringer because it is also quite strong at dealing with the invaders by itself. I really like spirits with mobility, as Spirit Island is primarily a game about being in the right place at the right time, so using your special ability to move with the beasts is a huge plus for this spirit. I quite like Sharp Fang's starting cards, though they are fairly low powered, they all have a low cost and there's a good mix of abilities too. You can prevent builds, get more beasts onto the board, deal with single invaders, and push Dahan and invaders as needed. Their growth options are really flexible since you have 2 options every spirit phase. Though their presence placement is limited, their ability to take 3 energy whenever you want can put mages easily within reach, even if it does take a while to get their energy track going. Their tracks are also quite solid. You start at 2 card plays and you quickly ramp up. Even though your energy is low, your growth options and elements more than make up for that. Reclaim 1 is a nice little benefit for investing in the card plays track. Ranging Hunt is a little tricky to use, but it's such a key part of their arsenal. It's limited to gathering 1 beast, doing damage equal to the number of beasts, and then pushing 2 beasts, in that order. You have to cycle it properly to get maximum benefit, The push 2 this turn is going to be followed up by next turn's gather 1, so you always have 3 beasts in the land that you are targeting to kill off towns and cities. It's a pity that it can rarely get higher than this, but killing a city every turn for just 2 card plays worth of elements is amazing value. Frenzied Assault is easier to use but harder to trigger, and it is also capped on damage. But it is another way to kill cities though, which makes Sharp Fangs a pretty good spirit for clearing out built-up zones. Their main weakness is having a ceiling on their power level. They start out pretty strong, get a little stronger going into the mid-game, but then without good mages, they won't ever hit that power spike that other spirits experience. Once the lands start getting blighted, you are unable to use your most powerful weapon, Ranging Hunt, and that's a pretty big limitation. Sharp Fangs doesn't have any particularly strong synergies with other spirits, since it's mostly playing its own game with the beasts. Spirits who can provide some defense and blight removal to ensure that Ranging Hunt can keep going throughout the game are helpful to have. Heart of the Wildfire is a difficult spirit to have on your team. All that blight means you'll largely have to keep to your own lands. For mages, you will be pretty happy to draw anything that keys off of beasts. So, for instance, Savage Transformation, Sea Monsters, and of course, Tigers Hunting. We're into the top half now, so these are some spirits I really enjoy playing. Lightning Swift Strike is my next pick. There's something really pure about Lightning's near total focus on destruction of towns and cities, and that makes for a really focused game. A lot of challenge comes from deciding when to use your special ability to make your powers fast this turn and deal with immediate threats, or wait to use them in the slow phase to solve next turn's problems. As I've played more, I've found myself using their special ability less, but then I'm also using it more strategically, so there is actually some hidden depth to how this spirit plays. Their starting cards are an interesting mix. You've got 2 standout cards, which Lightning would play every turn if they could. Lightning's Boon totally changes how some spirits interact with the board, particularly slow, offensive spirits like Ocean and Thunderspeaker. Shatter Homesteads has great range at 2. Most starting cards are range 1 or 0. The other 2 cards feel less impactful. Dahan movement is always nice, but Raging Storm definitely stands out as a weak card, at least early in the game. Explorers don't tend to cluster, and you don't do any additional damage by yourself, so you're going to need access to more powers or work with other spirits to support you in killing built-up towns or cities using this card. For 3 cost, it's extremely difficult to play it for any real effect early in the game. This leads into Lightning's biggest weakness, and that's their energy track. They start out with 2 card players, but only 1 energy per turn, and they have a starting card that costs 3. You obviously want to be placing Sacred Sites with the middle growth option to power up Shatter Homesteads and your innate power, but you are pushed to take the last option to gain enough energy to keep making use of your card plays. Of all of the low complexity spirits, Lightning easily has the most awkward reclaim cycles, and I think it's really easy to fall into the trap of just taking Reclaim over and over again to get your powerful, cheap cards back into hand. But once you solve that puzzle and get some presence down and their innate going regularly, Lightning is pretty fearsome. I really like Lightning with the slow offensive spirits that I mentioned earlier, because they are one of the few combinations that can win in Terror level 2 rather than having to hold out for Terror level 3. I do want to give a special mention to River, because when you combine the top level of Massive Flooding with Raging Storm, you can use it to destroy every invader in a chosen land, which isn't bad for 2 low complexity spirits. For me, the major power that I like to draw most is, of course, Talons of Lightning. Though it's 6 cost, it is difficult to play. When you do, it's trivial to get the elements you need to trigger the bottom half, and that is worth building up to. We move now from a fire-based heavier offense spirit to the fire-based heavy offense spirit. Heart of the Wildfire is my number 5. The direct damage that Wildfire can do just through their presence placement is unlike anything else in the base game or first expansion. This does make them a real breath of fresh air if you've been playing a lot of defensive or utility-based spirits. Of course, as soon as you unlock the second fire on their tracks, this direct damage does mean you will also be placing Blight. This can make other spirits games a lot trickier, but you're able to do so much damage consistently that it's usually worth them working around you. Playing as Wildfire is probably the closest that Spirit Island will come to feeling like a player versus player game, and I have to say I love it for that. Just don't expect to end the game with a healthy island. Wildfire's cards aren't as unique as their special ability, but they have some pretty interesting things going on. Flame's Fury works extremely well with powers that do repeat damage, like Spread's Damaging Innate, or spirits who need a little bit of a boost to kill cities, like River. Threatening Flames is a nice control card that in some situations can generate a heap of fear. The other two are more standard. You've got some Destroying Towns and Pushing to Harm, and Fear and Damage. It's the innate power in Firestorm that really makes Wildfire an inferno of destruction. As your fire and plant elements stack up, you eventually just begin to wipe invaders off the map in multiple lands, so long as they have your presence and blight. This makes your other innate quite a tricky business to manage, because removing too much blight in your lands makes you less powerful. But if you remove too little, you could just lose. This is a really brilliant puzzle to solve, and it's part of what makes Wildfire so much fun to play. Wildfire's weakness is that early in the game, they are all about the direct damage and very little else. They get 1 card play and 0 energy generation. It is really nice to have both energy plus presence and gain power plus presence as growth options, but it doesn't quite make up for being limited to 1 card for a turn or more. Luckily, they do ramp up quite quickly and they don't ever let up. And the feeling of building momentum is both thematic for the spirit and also the main reason that Spirit Island is such a fun game to play. Wildfire benefits hugely in a game with Spread of Rampant Green, because the additional presence placement from Gift of Proliferation every 2 turns or so means that you're doing more direct damage and you have more lands to trigger Firestorm in. Aside from that, you just generally like to be paired with defensive spirits like Vital Strength of the Earth, who can also remove Blight, which helps to keep your own Blight placement in check. Wildfire's most synergistic major powers are ones that come with fire and plant elements that also involve placing presence. That sounds very niche, but there's actually 2 of them. You have Unrelenting Growth and Blazing Renewal. This one even allows you to replace your destroyed presence, which is likely to happen at some point due to the inevitable blight cascades that you will cause. Also, if you really want to go heavy on the damage, you won't go wrong picking up Pillar of Living Flame. My 4th favourite spirit is the last of the low complexity spirits, River Surges in Sunlight. I think for many of the low complexity spirits you feel like you've seen everything they have to offer after 2 or 3 plays. River is interesting enough to keep coming back to time and time again. They have a great mix of offensive, control and utility-based powers. Because you don't have a growth option that allows you to place presence and gain energy, there is quite a puzzle in figuring out how best to unlock energy and card plays from your tracks, since they grow at about the same rate. Luckily, your starting cards can help you to maintain the balance of energy and cards. Obviously, Boon of Vigor is better played on other spirits for its maximum effect, but in a pinch you can use it to smooth out your next turn by giving yourself extra energy. River's Bounty is just a great card. Stacking Dahan is always worthwhile, and it also helps to clear out the invaders, though you need to draw some defensive minor powers to make the most of it. Wash Away is the crucial card for River, as it almost always ensures that you can prevent a Ravage next turn. Flash Floods is probably the weakest card of the bunch, but being able to kill a coastal town in the fast phase whenever needed isn't the worst power to have. Placing presence as River is all about getting into the wetlands. You almost never want to have a sacred site on the board because a single presence in each of the wetlands in the game should be sufficient, thanks to River's special ability. That's why both of their presence placing options are pretty great. You can either chain the middle option and go 1-2 into a wetland, or you can skip the middle land and grab a power card instead. Massive Flooding is a great ability, not too difficult to trigger, but hugely impactful once you get to the highest level. Combined with Flash Floods, it can even kill cities, and with Wash Away you can make sure to get plenty of towns and explorers into the same land before the flood begins. River's most significant weakness is their inability to deal with cities early on. Since they can only push explorers and towns, the lands that start with a city are going to be an issue unless they draw in 2 defensive cards. Also, they need to work with the Dahan to clear out invaders, because eventually River won't have enough pushing power to keep all the lands in the game under control. River goes great with any spirits that can do little bits of damage to help top up Massive Flooding, such as Spread of Rampant Green. Also, you work well with spirits who benefit from positioning invaders in specific places, like Ocean. If you're playing with a spirit with a high number of card plays, like Lightning, they'll be extremely grateful to have Boon of Vigour to keep them going. For mages, River likes to draw anything with Flood in the title, predictably, so Fire and Flood, or Cleansing Floods, are pretty solid cards to draw. Either can be used to top off your Massive Flooding, or else hit another land in the same turn. I'm going to move now from a low complexity spirit to possibly the most complex spirit released so far. My number 3 is Serpent Slumbering Beneath the Island. I imagine everyone remembers the first time they played Serpent, that feeling of being weak early on, harmful even, as you have to absorb others' presence just to keep you going. Your utility cards are helpful and welcome, but it never really feels like you're making a dent in the invaders, and then this happens. You place this presence here, and everything changes. You leap from 2 card plays to 4. You go from 1 energy income to 6. For a spirit whose theme is about awakening from a deep sleep, the placement of this presence really does feel like you're suddenly waking up from a dream where you couldn't do anything and realizing, oh wait, I am useful. Serpent is the definition of a late game spirit, and it is an exciting late game to be a part of. Their starting cards are heavily based around utility. You have one that grants energy, one that grants minor powers, one that grants energy and elements at the cost of another player's presence, and finally, a defensive card. Luckily, it is an extremely good defensive card. It can defend 3 in multiple lands from the second turn. Often, I'm going to aim to place either my first or second presence in whichever land has the most adjacency to the land type that's going to be the first to ravage, to maximise the usefulness of Aegis early on. Unfortunately, your presence placement is restricted to lands without blight, so if your Aegis ever fails, you could find yourself with few good options for your growth. Like Sharp Fangs and Keeper, Serpent is able to choose 2 growth options, so that means you can almost always get presence down and take the energy you need for your cards, or pick up more cards. The Reclaim and Move 1 presence option is a really interesting growth option. It allows you to reach blighted lands or set up for another Aegis after you've reclaimed. You just need to make sure that you're always placing presence. Everything else is secondary. Serpent's complexity continues to their tracks and innate abilities. Their tracks are, let's just face it, weird. You gain so many random elements, including an early any element choice, just to give you even more to think about. You get an early Reclaim 1 too, which can allow you to keep playing Aegis or consume lots of essence so that you can come online even faster. The innates on the left here give you some nice bonuses, and your allies can also benefit if you've eaten enough of their presence. On the right, you have a damage ability, which scales up nicely with your elements, a fear generating ability that also scales with elements, and then there's this. this right here is the main reason to play Serpent. You spend 7 energy, and in every land in the game, you do 1 damage for each presence in and adjacent to that land. It's easily the most difficult ability in the game to trigger, requiring 3 different elements in huge quantities, but it's worth building up to. Some spirits have single land nukes. Serpent is the only one to have proper board wipe. You need to spread your presence out to ensure that this ability can be used for its maximum effect, and you also want to surround the most problematic lands. Serpent's main weakness, as I've already suggested, is having very little ability to affect the board early in the game. One way to counteract this is to pick up an early major power and then use your 4 energy growth option to ensure that you can play it consistently. While this is a strong way to play Serpent, it does mean you'll be slower to hit your maximum rank in Serpent Rouses in Anger, so you have to ask, is that worth it? It really depends on the situation. As I've already mentioned in this video, Serpent pairs extremely well with Spread of Rampant Green. Spread can do the work of defending while you come online, and they can help you to get there faster with Gift of Proliferation. Other spirits like Vital Strength of the Earth, which reliably place presence, don't mind your Absorb Essence so much. Then you have offensive spirits with good range, like Lightning Swift Strike. They can help to keep the board under control while you wake up. You don't play very well at all with Wildfire, since the blights can limit your ability to get your presence into the right places. For mages, you really just want anything that helps you hit max rank in Serpent Rouses in Anger, since no major is as powerful as that. Unlock the Gates of Deepest Power is great for this, and so is the Land Thrashes in Furious Pain. I particularly like this card for 2 reasons. It's thematically linked to Serpent, as the land thrashing about is exactly what happens when Serpent is waking up. Also, since Serpent is likely to let a few blights slip through early on, you can use this card to round out your damage in the areas that you can't reach with your innate power. My runner-up is Ocean's Hungry Grasp. Ocean is just so much fun to play. I like spirits who have mechanics that match their theme, and while all do that to an extent, nothing quite matches the tidal mechanic that is built into Ocean's growth choices. You gather your strength in the ocean, any ocean, because of course the oceans are all connected. Then the tide comes in, which is when the ocean is at its most dangerous. Finally, the waters recede as ocean recovers its strength, and the cycle begins anew. Grow in power, attack at high tide, fall back in low tide. That is just a staggering amount of theme, and it's all in the very first phase of the game. Ocean's starting powers are a really useful mix of offense in these 2 cards, defense, and you have a little bit of Dahan mobility for good measure. As for their special abilities, having Ocean in the game is truly game-changing. Suddenly, Push becomes the best card type to draw because other spirits can just push the invaders into the ocean and drown them. Their innate powers are fine. Pound the ships to splinters is easy enough to use, but not hugely interesting. Swallow the Land Dwellers is great once you get it to the high levels, but the range 0 is a challenge that you really have to work around. Ocean's main weaknesses are their reliance on drowning to have any kind of energy gain. Their standard energy track is barely worth the name. Mages will appear to be out of your reach for a long time, but once you start drowning pieces, then you actually can ramp up to mages quite nicely. The presence restriction to coastal lands is a major limitation, particularly for defense cards, which tend to be quite low range. Their growth options are as fun as they are difficult to use. It's all too easy to end up with too many presents in the ocean and not enough on the shores, or you find yourself having to take the low tide option just to avoid a ravage destroying your presence. Unlike some spirits, you can't constantly reclaim to replay your most powerful cards because you need your presence on the shores. That said, if you get the growth cycle right, you have inbuilt mobility and the most deadly zone of control of any spirit in the game. For synergies, I really like Ocean with River. The two water spirits work extremely well together. Boon of Vigour, one of River's starting cards, helps to keep Ocean's energy going when drowning is still difficult to pull off. And of course, water is a shared element for Elemental Boon. But it's mostly River's ability to control the centre of the board and push the invaders towards Ocean's domain that makes these two so synergistic. Other spirits that can create their own zones of control, such as Keeper of the Forbidden Wilds and Vital Strength of the Earth, can allow Ocean to focus on what they do best, swallowing up the coastal invaders. The major powers that you like to see as Ocean are pretty obvious. You want to see any of Tsunami, Sweep into the Sea, and most potently, Cast Down into the Briny Deep. Who cares if part of the island is gone? You live in the ocean. One other major power card that is extremely potent for Ocean is Flow Like Water, Reach Like Air. It's a cheap solution to Ocean's biggest problem, which is their inability to affect the island centre, and it can allow you to drown a whole bunch of invaders by pushing them and your presence into the ocean. So, just to review, I like spirits that can do multiplicative damage with high mobility and have a well-rounded set of starting powers. So it really shouldn't come as a surprise that Thunderspeaker is my favourite spirit. I adore Thunderspeaker, and if they are still available when picking spirits, I often have to convince myself not to play them, and I usually cave in and play them anyway. Their starting powers are probably the most versatile set for any spirit. Thunderspeaker has one card to deal with single explorers, fast speed and prevent builds, one card to defend, one card for Dahan mobility, and my favourite starting card in the entire game, a single land nuke, Manifestations of Power and Glory. There's a real thrill in creating what I call Dahan death stacks and then roaming around the island, gathering up more and more Dahan and then smashing into the invaders using this card. I like to keep a tally of how big I can get my Manifestations of Power and Glory, and so far my record is 48 damage, and that's with 6 presence and 8 Dahan. Their innate powers are more of the same. You have some Dahan mobility on the left and another nuke on the right, and you also have the option to use both either fast or slow later in the game. Their special abilities contain one of their biggest downsides. Losing Dahan adjacent to your lands means that you lose presence. But that's more than made up for by the other special ability, which is that your presence can move when the Dahan moves. And it's that ability that makes Thunderspeaker, well, Thunderspeaker. So aside from potential presence loss from dead Dahan, what's Thunderspeaker's weakness? Well, that has to be their energy track. To do anything with Thunderspeaker, you really need to go for 2 card plays on turn 1. But they only have 1 energy as standard per turn, and their best card costs 3. That means you might be tempted to keep taking the 1 presence 4 energy growth option, but for real power you need to choose the middle 2 presence option as much as possible. Generally, I try to do 1 of each during each reclaim cycle. The lack of gain powers in the middle of the reclaim cycle is less a weakness once you work around it. It does actually make your reclaim cycles quite easy to plan out ahead of time because you know exactly what cards you'll have to work with. Thunderspeaker's energy issues mean they can't really use mages all that well, but their innates and starting powers are so good they don't really need mages. In terms of synergies, I really like Thunderspeaker with Lightning Swift Strike. Not just because it's thematic, but because the two of them share some important elements which make Elemental Boon a real power spike card for the two of them. River Surges in Sunlight helps to smooth out your energy use with the Boon of Vigour card, and also they can add more Dahan using the River's Bounty card. Keeper of the Forbidden Wilds can push Dahan from their zone of control, allowing you to gather them up and then control the rest of the board. If you do go for major powers, you really can't go wrong with anything that moves Dahan around, so you can imagine my favourite draw is Rapid Wings of Sunlight. Nothing is better than getting a Dahan death stack right where it needs to be. So there we go, that's my rankings for my favourite spirits to play in Spirit Island. Comment below with your favourite spirits, and if you have any suggestions for Spirit Island or any other board game content, please do let me know. In my next video, I plan to do a full solo playthrough using Thunderspeaker and Lightning Swift Strike, so look out for that. Thanks, and I'll see you again soon.